The humble Valentine versus the legendary tiger. How the geometry of combat, the discipline of crews, and the science of post-battle debunked the myth of a super-heavy monster that supposedly burned with a single shot. On the Eastern Front, the headlines often appeared before the checks. First, there was a vivid story. Then the facts were pulled up to it. And only then someone tried to figure out what exactly happened. That's what happened to the story about the super-heavy tigers that were burning from the Valentine's shots. The formula sounded paradoxical, provoked an argument, and was easy to remember. During the war, when information came in fragments, the paradox became almost synonymous with the truth. But this plot was born not from miracles, but from the intersection of technology, tactics, and the human psyche, reinforced by the propaganda of both sides. The Tiger's military reputation was developing rapidly. At the turn of 1942-1943, German heavy tanks entered the battle in small batches, operating at points of tension. Their appearance often coincided with the failures of the enemy's offensives, which meant that any tactical hit in the Tiger seemed almost an impossible feat. This is a breeding ground for frontline rumors. The stronger the image of a champion car, the more valuable is the story of how this image can be destroyed. The fear-hope balance created legends faster than staff reports. In parallel, there was another, less spectacular but important line. Lend-lease Valentines were working at the front. The car is low, quiet, and has a strong reputation for reliability, especially in marches and reconnaissance. The change of guns to the 57mm 6PDR gave them a noticeable increase in anti-tank capabilities at short ranges, primarily on the sides and stern of heavy targets. However, this knowledge remained technical. Instructors, company and battery commanders understood it, but not always ordinary infantrymen, who needed a simple explanation of what they saw. A simple explanation appeared in the form of a formula. The Valentine was fired, the Tiger caught fire. Neither the distance, nor the angle of the encounter, nor the type of ammunition fit neatly into the formula. The optics of combat were added to the myth-making. A tank duel is seconds and smoke, noise and dust, incomplete viewing areas, intermittent radio communication. The car may not burst into flames immediately, but 10 seconds after penetration, sometimes due to secondary factors, the lubricant caught fire, the insulation went on fire, the propellant charge popped. To an outside observer, it seems that shot was decisive, although the real sequence of events is recorded only by the post-combat inspection. There was almost no inspection at the front line. Often, only memories remained. The memories were controlled by emotions. Emotions liked clear reasons. The German side also contributed. The crews of the Tigers faced defeats that contradicted their expectations, built up by textbooks and manuals. The forehead does not take hold. The board holds most medium-caliber guns at a standard distance. When an unexpected fire appeared in the dynamics of the battle, the question, why did they catch fire, was born. If the crew did not see at what angle and from where the projectile came, the answer shifted to the area of incomprehensible properties of enemy weapons. In the reports, this turned into dry formulas about strong armor piercing or special ammunition. A couple of such phrases, relayed through several retellings, have taken on a separate life. Newspapers and flying leaflets played an important role. For a journalist working for a military audience, any story benefits from personalization and contrast. Our boys and their miracle tanks, courage against technology. Valentine as the hero of modest strength fit perfectly. Not the fastest, not the most formidable, but able to sneak up and stab. The Tiger served as an excellent antagonist, a massive tower, a menacing silhouette, and a well-known name. As a result, the plot seemed to be writing itself. Fragile perseverance against shell-like audacity. The actual reservations about the distance and the vulnerable side were lost during the layout of the title. The gluing of the legend was reinforced by another cultural factor, terminology. In the Russian language, super heavy has become firmly entrenched as an emotional enhancement, although according to the classification, Tiger is heavy, and super heavy is generally a different league and other masses. The rhetorical hyperbole made the confrontation more dramatic. The super heavy the opponent, the more miraculous his defeat. It was worth repeating this formula a couple of times in memories or notes, and it began to be perceived as the background truth. On a technical level, the myth was based on half the truth. Half of it was that the flank and rear defeats solved everything. In the world armies of 1943-1944, this is the ABC. To survive head, on, and die sideways is a common plot for any heavy machine. Valentine gave a chance to implement a flank attack. It was low, predictable in management, acceptable in terms of resources. It worked in ambushes on rough terrain, but half the truth remained half. Not any Valentine, not at any range, not with any projectile, and not on any part of the Tiger. Where clarification was needed, a simplified narrative came into play. Another building block is ammunition logistics. At the front, different batches of shells could coexist, differing in the quality of the core, armor penetration, and the presence of a tracer. Crews rarely microbalanced ammunition by batch. They took what they had. When a successful hit coincided with a strong batch, perception assigned credit to the gun and tank, rather than to the specific ammunition. On the other hand, the misses and ricochets were explained by the wrong projectiles, or the wrong distance. This did not interfere with the myth. It fed on exceptions, not the norm. The psychology of combat overlapped with geography. The Eastern Front is generous with reliefs where distances are sharply reduced. Copses, plantings, broken beams, villages with solid buildings. It is there that heavy vehicles lose the advantage of ranged combat and are detected at distances where even medium caliber does its job. For the witness of the result who did not see the maneuver, the chain of cause and effect looked linear. There was a Tiger, there was a Valentine, a shot sounded, a fire broke out. Everything else was disappearing into smoke. Finally, post-war memory. The memoirs were written decades later, edited, and adjusted to meet the reader's expectations. The story of the incomprehensible fires from Valentine has survived the front precisely because it is convenient. It gives drama, brings satisfaction to justice, and confirms an important moral. Technique is defeated by skill, but convenience does not equal accuracy. To turn a legend into an episode under study, it is useful to decompose it into components. What the crew could see, what angles of encounter were likely in a particular area. What is the nomenclature of ammunition in these parts? What reports of repair workers on the nature of damage? And, most importantly, at what distance the fight began and ended? This is how the myth was born. From a chain of quite realistic circumstances, reinforced by emotional drama. And it still works like a warhead. It lures, argues, and promises revelation. Next, routine but interesting work is required. Rewind the tape and look at the details without bias. The following chapters will deal with exactly this. Technology versus technology, combat episodes, and the science of post-battle fires so that specific distances, angles, and facts will resound where the legend used to ring. To remove the ceremonial uniform from the legend, it is useful to calmly reduce iron to iron. In one corner of the ring is a Tiger I, heavy, with a large silhouette, a powerful 88mm cannon, and a solid reserve of armor. The other is a late-release Valentine with a 57mm 6-peter. Modest height, slow running, but a sharp prick at short range in a quiet, sneaking manner. The winner is not the one who thunders louder, but the one who imposes his own conditions of battle. This chapter will examine what conditions each machine sought to impose, and why the clash of their capabilities created the ground for inexplicable defeats. Let's start with armor as the primary currency of the tank economy. The forehead of the Tiger hull is covered with plates of the order of 100mm. The forehead of the tower with a shield around the cannon is even thicker. This is the front shield of showcase invulnerability, designed to hold most of the medium-range anti-tank weapons at typical distances of half a kilometer and beyond. But the side is a different song. 80mm in the upper part of the hull and turret sides. Below are thinner zones, the joint of armor parts, hatches, welds, shelves above the tracks. The side is not thin. It is simply not designed to carry frontal fire. It needs maneuver, distance, and the protection of neighbors. That's where any discernible opponent is looking for entry. Now to the 6-pound cannon, whose reputation on the Eastern Front was quieter than its potential. 57mm caliber. High muzzle velocity for armor-piercing projectiles. Several types of ammunition. Classic solid body AP, CAP, APCBC, for better behavior in oblique encounters. Subcaliber APCR with a solid core for a brief but aggressive breakthrough. Late APDS with a detachable pallet, and an outstanding, albeit capricious, result at close and the average distance. An important caveat: the breakdown figures that people like to retell are valid only together with the distance and angle of the meeting. An 80mm slab at 40 to 50 degrees is no longer 80, but the equivalent is thicker. 20 degrees to normal, on the contrary, makes the task easier. A school geometry lesson turns arguments about takes doesn't take into a question of how exactly did they shoot. The Tiger cannon is the famous 8.8cm KWK-36. She monitors the battlefield like a conductor watches an orchestra. Range, rate of fire, excellent sights, ease of guidance. Her strongest side is frontal control of space, to keep out, to break attempts to flank, to frighten by the mere fact of her presence. But the 88mm also has a regulation. It shows the best result with a stable platform, preoccupied positions, and a clear firing sector. Within hundreds of meters, seconds decide everything. And here the advantages of vision and tabular ballistics collide with the advantages of a low silhouette and an unexpected angle. The Valentine silhouette is a separate part of the equation. The car is low, with a simple geometry. Sits in the folds of the terrain, hiding behind bushes and the edges of the beams. A low profile does not provide invisibility, but extra fractions of a second. The Tiger crew sees the attacker's launch target a little later than they would like, and the 6 PDR shooter gets a chance to shoot first while the heavy opponent turns the turret and aligns the sight. At the training ground, this difference seems like a small thing. In real combat, it stretches into the gap between managed and failed. Ergonomics and surveillance complete the picture. In Tiger, the fighting compartment is more spacious, the loader's work is more convenient, the optics are better, the communication is better. All these factors pull the battle to an organized distance where training and interaction techniques are firing. Valentine is simpler, tighter, but predictable in management, with clear modes. For an ambush, where one precise action is more important than a prolonged exchange of fire, this is a sufficient set. The radio and allied vehicles disciplines short maneuvers. Walk, stand, give 1-2, leave. While a heavy opponent needs to redefine the meaning of the battle. The placement of vulnerabilities in Tiger is also not an accident. The ammunition lining partially lives in niches and sponsons. The MTO with its gasoline, powered Maybach lives in the stern. Fuel and oil lines, vent channels, armor edges at the roof of the tracked shelves are logical, weak diagonals, into which the 57mm armor-piercing tends at short range. Any armor is a set of compromises. A reinforced forehead required mass. Mass required savings somewhere, and savings were not critical to the doctrine. The doctrine assumed that tactics, distance, and unit would cover the board. Let's talk about the angle match. The concepts of shooting into the side and shooting under the side are often confused. For the 6-pouther, not only the plane of the armor is important, but also the position of the target relative to the shooter. If Valentine goes out to 200 to 300 meters and shoots at an angle to the normal of 10 to 20 degrees, this is almost a laboratory scenario. The thickness is equivalent, or only slightly higher than the nominal value. The projectile is not inclined to ricochet, and the velocity range is just where the penetration is stable. If the side is swamped by 40 degrees, the matter becomes more complicated. Then the subtleties are decided. The quality of the batch of shells, the accuracy of aiming, the choice of the point of impact. On city streets, in copses, and at road bends, geometry more often favors small and sharp than large and long range. Why not head-on? Because head-to-head is an exchange of trump cards based on Tiger rules. The frontal plate, the mask shield, the complex curved joints around the crown of the cannon. All this reduces the chances of the 57mm to theoretical exceptions, leaving the reality on the side of the 88mm. As soon as the distance drops and the angle goes away from the front, the rules are rewritten. The thickness of the side gives a chance, and the volume of the hull and the saturation of the equipment inside greatly increase the likelihood of post-collision effects, from scattering fragments to catching fire. Visually, it looks dramatic, and then turns into the same shot, flame story, although the technical chain is longer. You can't ignore the undercarriage either. The wide track and Tiger chess rollers are good at even distances and on hard ground. giving the platform a smoothness for accurate shooting. But as soon as you have to break the trajectory in close quarters, the array and inertia begin to argue with the task. Valentine maneuvers more modestly in terms of speed, but it feels easier for the crew. It has less unnecessary body vibrations during a short jerk from cover to the firing point and back. This is not superiority by passport. It is suitability by place. Ammunition completes the comparison. For 6 PDRs at close range, classic APCBC are solved. They are reliable in their behavior in armor, and are not as sensitive to the quality of the core as the subcaliber. The APCR gives a brief head start on breaking through at the correct speed of the encounter, but loses out in saving energy after breaking through. In theory, APDS turns 57mm into lightning. In practice, it requires the discipline of aiming and stable release quality. In the real battle of the Eastern Front, it was not ideal schedules that were decided, but what was in the boxes of a particular crew on a particular day. Tiger has the opposite. A wide range of reliable, high-explosive and armor-piercing shells for universal operation, plus the quality of German optics, which allows the use of ballistics for the entire length of the sector. When you bring everything together, the feeling of magie noire disappears. Tiger wants range, frontal duels, and a clear sector. Valentine wants relief, creases, a short step to the side of the target and 2 or 3 shots before responding. Where one dictates its own terms, the other loses its meaning. Where the conditions rewrite the terrain, the equation suddenly converges in favor of a quiet 57mm steeple. And if an armor-piercing bullet passes along the side of a heavy vehicle at such a point, a domino begins inside. Fragments, shockwaves, broken pipelines, smoldering insulation, a flash of powder grains. And from the outside, it looks like it was taken and set on fire. The result is simple and contradicts the headlines. There is no miracle tank that always has nothing to answer, and there is no miracle shot that always creates a sensation. There are configurations of space and time where the odds shift. The technique of both sides was designed for different roles. At the junction of the roles, the very episodes arise from which myths are born. In the next chapter, we'll look at specific cases, by terrain, distances, angles, and moments of impact, to see how the abstractions described here turned into fire, smoke, and highly simplified memories. To see how the legend fused with reality, it is useful to decompose several episodes into protocols: terrain, distance, angle, ammunition, secondary effects. Where everything is obvious on paper, on the ground it's decided by a bend in the road, a sparse bush, and a 5-second head start. Below are typical situations that turned into the short phrase, "The tiger from Valentine was set on fire," in the reports, although the chain of reasons was longer. Skalatsky Woodland, early spring. After a nighttime regrouping, 2 Valentine-based vehicles take up position in a hollow between a strip of shrubbery and a field camp. The ground is wet, and the sound of the tracks is muffled. A German cover column stretches along the country road. A semi-tracked tractor is in front, followed by a tiger, and then armored personnel carriers. Visibility is like in a chess problem. Straight lines are replaced by pockets of shadow. The first Valentine moves forward by the length of the hull, catches the side of the tiger at the moment when it passes the bend, and aligns the hull. The distance on the map is 250 meters, and it feels very close. A shot along the upper strip of the side at an angle to the normal of about 15 degrees. The projectile passes through the armor, rips open the shelf above the track, breaks the oil pipeline. The flame does not flare up immediately. First blue smoke, then heat in the MTO. The fire swells, the crew extinguishes, but the second shot prevents it. Already in the tower, in the area of the niche with the laying. From the outside, it looks like a fire shot. In the protocol, there are 2 different reasons: ventilation clogged with oil, and secondary ignition from a damaged propellant charge. The first picture is enough for the myth. Urban outskirts, summer afternoon. The assault group on the Valentines is covering the infantry in a densely built-up area. The tiger comes out from under the elevator canopy to expand the fire sector along the main street. In a head-on duel, he is the master of the situation. But the street is broken by a T-shaped intersection. On the right is a brick fence. On the left is a small square, behind which are 2 one-story houses. The Valentine takes up a position at the courtyard gate. The hull is angled, and the turret is pre-aimed at the target's intended point of appearance.
As soon as the Tiger noses at the
intersection, the side of the tower becomes a perfectly flat target window for a moment. The distance is 300 plus or minus. The angle is soft. The armor, piercing shell is included as in the textbook. Inside there are fragments, a disabled sight, the door of the zip box knocked off its hinges, and the disorientation of the crew. There is no fire yet, but the Tiger loses seconds and inertia, and finds itself shot through the second position of the Valentine, sheltered by the weighing booth. The second shot hits below, in the area of the fuel line. Now there is a fire. The neighboring infantry sees only the moment of the flash and the source, where the little one was standing. In the evening summary, this is shortened to burned from an ambush position. And in the oral narrators, it is simply Valentine set on fire. Forest belt at the edge of the field. Late autumn. The fog lasts until noon. The ground is sticky. The Tiger takes the edge of the forest with cover, intending to bypass the firing point on the hill. The Valentine is hiding in a rut between two strips of young pine trees. Its disguise is wet, and it smells of tar. The main thing here is silence. In a heavy car, the sound decreases at low revs, but the mass still gives itself away when it crosses the ditch. The 6 PDR shooter catches this moment when the Tiger's hull temporarily hangs diagonally. The sideline relative to the cannon is almost normal. The shot goes through the area above the skating rinks, where wiring and air ducts pass behind the armor. The penetration gives not so much fire as a blow to the nervous system of the car. The connection is lost. There is a burning smell inside. The sight glass is darkening in the tower. The crew backs up, exposing the stern to a second shot from a different position, where the Valentine has moved along the forest belt. The second hit is in the ventilation grills of the MTO. Now the fire is inevitable. The fog plays along with the picture. Everything looks like an instantaneous fire from one shot, although the event is composite. A field camp on a step ridge. Wind. Dust. It is more difficult for Valentine here. There is nowhere to lay out short distances. Everything is visible from afar, and the Tiger can work like a battery, controlling the approaches to the beam. But even the step is not completely flat. Along the ridge there is an old reclamation ditch, 1.5 meters deep. A couple of British cars are hiding in it, showing only sections of the tower outside. The trick is in synchronicity. The first shooter removes the observation device. The second immediately transfers fire with a targeted micro-guidance into the side of the hull, while the Tiger distributes commands and turns the turret. The distance for 57 millimeters is risky, about 400 meters, but the wind in the back and the rigid platform give stability. The projectile pierces the side with a small margin, splits the edge of the internal equipment, and warm metal shavings pour into it. The fire starts later, when the engine, already overheated, picks up the smoldering. It's a mystery to an outsider why it caught fire, even though the firing contact ended a few minutes ago. For a technician, it's a classic of secondary ignition. Crossroads of country lanes, winter, present. Daytime visibility is excellent, but so is audibility. Any jerk can be heard a kilometer away. Here, training and discipline decide. The Valentine had preoccupied the inner turning radius of the snow scrap pile, with the turret rotated 40 degrees to the direction of travel. The Tiger comes from the direction of the forest, shifting slightly to the outer radius so as not to slide into an icy track. At this moment, a thin wedge of visibility appears between the Tiger's track and the side. This is the golden gap for the 6-pound-hour shooter. A bullet in a shooting gallery cannot do this, but a projectile can in combat. A shot at an acute angle catches the edge of the side and goes inside with a noticeable loss of energy, but with a sufficient fragmentation bouquet to disable the fuel supply unit. There is no fire. The Tiger is slowly dying down. The crew throws a smoke grenade in the confusion. From the outside, thick smoke is perceived as fire, and after a week the story returns to the usual formula: caught fire. There are also reverse plots where the myth does not add up. A narrow ravine where the Valentine is forced to shoot head-on at angles that do not give 57 millimeters a chance. A blown bridge on the dam, where the Tiger sees and hits earlier. A junction of units where a heavy tank is covered with a flak. Wheelbarrow and an infantry squad with grenade launchers. There the ambush game of the small breaks down. Such episodes are rarely heard in retellings. They do not have the effect of surprise. which means they do not live well outside the battle log. But it is these non-sensational scenes that keep the outline of the truth. Valentine's victory is not mediocrity, but a well-put-together puzzle of conditions. To complete the picture, it is important to note that the word burned is not equal to burned to the ground. The photographs of post-combat inspections clearly show how often a fire meant local smoke on the tracks, scorched cladding above the tracks, and charred rubber on the rollers. The crew could leave the car, and the repairman then returned it to service. In memoirs, this distinction is lost, because the characters and readers are more interested in the drama of the moment than the fate of a particular car in a week. The terminological confusion adds fuel to the fire of the legend. Now about how these cases turned into paper. The field report recorded a minimum of variables: time, square, target type, and expense. In rare cases, the angle of encounter and the presumed point of defeat were added. Tactics and geometry were out of the question. When inquiries were later written on these reports, the simple phrases, hit from a short distance or set on fire from hiding, became self-sufficient. In the next round of processing, in the popular retelling, they coalesced into set on fire with a shot, and the question, how exactly, disappeared. That is why the protocol is a convenient tool against the legend. If you add 4 lines to each arson: distance, angle, type of ammunition, secondary effect, then a map emerges. The tigers burned where they were forced to live, not according to their rules. Not on the flat surface of long-range duels, but in places with controlled battle geometry. Woodlands, intersections with bends, courtyards and driveways, ditches and ramparts, winter turns with icy edges. At these points, a 57mm cannon with normal armor piercing became not a miracle, but a sufficient tool. From such private scenes, the effect of incomprehensibility was born for the crews of heavy vehicles. When the training explains that the board holds medium calibers, and the battlefield presents half-meter distances and sharp angles, perception signals, something doesn't add up. It just fits. The input conditions have changed. The chapter on technology has already shown why. This one shows exactly where the redefinition of the rules took place. Next, it remains to analyze the physics of post-battle fires and dot the burned, smoked, disabled, so that the legend loses its magic, but retains respect for the people who made the iron play humanly on the ground. From the outside, everything looks simple. A shot, a flash, smoke, screams. Less spectacular but very stubborn laws of materials, science, and thermodynamics work inside the tank. Fire from a shot is not the magic of luck, but a chain of several links. Penetration. A cloud of fragments behind the armor. The contact of this cloud with something that can burn or detonate. Oxygen access and air movement. Delays in heating and evaporation of fuel. The reaction of the crew. Let's analyze each link because it is in them that the myth of the unknown power of someone else's weapon disappears and predictable mechanics appear. Punching is not just a hole in the slab. The projectile, overcoming the armor, creates a cone of debris behind it. Fragments of its own hull, fragments of armor, cork wadding, millimeter and micron particles. This backwater stream moves at speeds that are enough to cut, crush, and knock out appliances, and at the same time, it is hot. The temperature of the fragments does not always bring them to a red glow, but it often exceeds the ignition thresholds of oil films, paint, and insulation. The key detail is that the flow is in a wide cone. It is not a sniper. It hits everything in its path, which means it easily finds weak ligaments, highway clamps, tank walls, ammunition stowage edges. The type of penetration dictates the composition of the cloud. When the plug is knocked out, when the armor throws out a whole glass, a massive part flies inside, capable of breaking through rigid body assemblies or crashing into a box of cartridges. With viscoplastic shear, fine but extremely aggressive chips are formed. They are less energetic for each fragment, but they penetrate into the cracks, knock out fragments of the glass sights, and sandblast the crew. At high angles of encounter, extensive rolling is added. Peeling of armor plates from the reverse side, giving a cloud of fragments without a clean draft. All of these scenarios can lead to a fire. It's just that the ignition paths are different. Next comes the chemistry of fuels and gunpowders. Gasoline evaporates easily, forming a combustible mixture with air in a wide range of concentrations. Diesel is less willing to release vapors, but when sprayed with a fine suspension, it ignites just as well.
Powder propellant charges, whether in casings or in caps, love heat and sparks, but they especially do not tolerate hot small particles that get stuck in the folds of bags or in the scratches of the casings. Destroyed ammunition stowage is not only a risk of detonation, but also a banal smoldering of gunpowder with a gradual transition to an open flame. Add oils and lubricants to this. They ignite worse than gasoline, but they keep burning for a long time and stickily, turning a local outbreak into a stable outbreak. Gorenje. Tracers and armor-piercing ones also contribute. The tracer is not a gas burner. It carries a small charge of compounds, but its remnants, flying through the interior of the tank, can pull off a spark where the steam mixture is already hanging. In addition to the tracer, friction works. Fragments, sliding along the edges of the body, along metal shavings and on painted surfaces, sufficiently heat the microzones until the thin films of oil ignite. This is an unpleasant combinatorics. Even when there is no fuel as such, the piggy bank of small sources can form into a flame. Ventilation and airflow are an underrated conductor. Tanks breathe. The engine draws air. The MTO fans drive jets. The turret slits and hatches give thrust. Once the main or tank is breached, the vapors receive a directional draft. In some layouts, chimneys work. Vertical shafts and channels that pull the mixture into a certain area, which is just full of hot irons. In one case, this leads to an instantaneous flash. In the other, to an incomprehensible delay of tens of seconds, until evaporation gives the desired concentration, until the air is mixed, until a spark appears. For an outside observer, the delay is erased. He sees only the climax and ties it to the last shot. The location of the vulnerabilities in a particular machine sets the fire routes. In heavy tanks, ammunition is often laid out on the sides in sponsons. Some of the charges are closer to the turret. Some are along the shelves. IT is saturated with hot surfaces, rubber hoses, filters soaked in fuel. Penetration along the upper side of the hull at distances of 200 to 300 meters for the 57 millimeters is a course with access to the corridor between the rollers and the inner shelves, where several fire hazard factors reside at once. Getting into the aft part cuts off the ventilation paths and can start a fire even without a real break in the tank. There is enough oil dust and peeling paint. A blow to the turret niche is rare for a light caliber, but if it happened, and there was a laying nearby, the probability of a kitchen effect is high. The powder ignites faster than the crew has time to react. Why do some hits burn, while others only cripple? Because not only energy is important, but also the geometry of the contact. The same 57 millimeter armor piercing, meeting the side at a favorable angle, will transfer both mass, fragmentation background, and heat into a compact volume. If the angle is wrong, some of the energy will go into the shift and ricochet. The flow behind the armor will be poorer, and the fragments will not reach the critical nodes. Plus, a case. Unfortunately, the wheel of fate is an ever-present factor. One fragment will fly a centimeter above the hose, the other, exactly into its coupling. Secondary sources of ignition complete the picture. Electrics suffer from spills and shocks. A short circuit on the battery can create a stable arc that ignites scraps of fabric and paper labels, and then everything around. The rubber of the support rollers smolders when heated and exposed to fire, smokes thickly and smells like a fire, reinforcing the impression of disaster, although sometimes only the outer layer burns. Hydraulic fluids and brake compounds in some units are also quite flammable. Breakdowns in the tubes generate fountains, which, in the presence of sparks, easily turn into a torch. Delays in the development of the fire are a separate puzzle for the witnesses. It happens that the fight has already subsided, but the car breaks out after a few minutes. There are three typical explanations for this. First, the smoldering turned into an open flame when the temperature rose to the threshold. Secondly, the evaporating fuel reached an explosive concentration and found a spark. From a swinging cable, from a hot pipe, from a fragment of the tracer. Third, the mechanics tried to start the engine or turn on the fans for evacuation, and they gave the air movement what the fire lacked. In the legend, this nuance is lost. They fired, it caught fire, although the reality is, they struck, the conditions were prepared, and then it broke out. The crew's reaction is the last line of defense. Fire extinguishers are almost always available, but access to them and their effectiveness depend on where it hit and what is already burning. If the flame is in the niche of the tower, the loader has seconds.
If there is almost no fighting in the MTO, evacuation.
A separate
psychological factor is smoke. It fills the volume faster than the temperature rises, blinding, making mistakes and wasting precious moments. In this area, the discrepancies between the textbook and the battle are great. In theory, we put out a small fire. In practice, we breathe, we look for a hatch, we come out, and extinguishing is later. The attacking side's ammunition set makes its own adjustments. Classic AP and APCBC usually carry little or no high explosive stuffing. Their firework is shrapnel and heat. Subcaliber APCRs are easier to penetrate on a short shoulder, but they often behave dryly behind the armor, leaving less red-hot dust. They are more dangerous for aggregates than for flammable environments. APDS adds speed and the chance of a clean end-to-end puncture with a poor cloud. Paradoxically, it is the too good penetration that sometimes gives less chance of an instantaneous fire, leaving the car more time to die a technical death from loss of oil pressure, cooling, and power supply. Therefore, fire statistics do not match one-on-one with penetration charts. The minutiae of production and operation decide a lot. The quality of welding and tightness of the mains, the wear of the oil seals, how carefully the crew carried the shells without leaving powder on the shelves, how often the oil pans were wiped. All these boring things directly affect the fate of a particular hit. Two identical tanks on paper behave differently in combat. One is clean and dry inside. The other is soaked in thin films of fuel and strewn with shavings. In the first case, the fire is less frequent. In the second, more often. And it is not the caliber that is to blame for this, but everyday life. Finally, let's distinguish the terms. The observers caught fire, and the repairman's burned out are different states. A local fire in an MTO with darkened panels and soot on the grills is not the same case as burning ammunition with burning through the roof of the tower. Gorenia. The smoke from the rubber of the rollers is not yet a fuel ignition. Loss of power and evacuation of the crew, not burned to the ground. When these states are put in one basket, statistics turn into a scarecrow. When they sort it out, it turns out that there were fires, but their mechanics fit into a textbook, not a book of miracles. The conclusion for our story is transparent. The Tigers burned from the Valentines, not because the 57mm projectile was endowed with special magic, but because the armor of the heavy machine was full of things that were afraid of hot chips and fumes. And ambush tactics brought the strike to vulnerable areas and advantageous angles. In some episodes it flared up immediately, in others it was delayed. Sometimes only the rubber was on fire, sometimes the kitchen in the tower, sometimes the entire engine compartment. In the language of science, aftershocks are variations on the same theme. A cloud of fragments has found fuel and air. In the next and final chapter, we will assemble this physical puzzle with tactical observations and technical characteristics into a general verdict on the myth. Without simplifications, but also without unnecessary mysticism. When the advertising glare and frontline smoke are removed, the legend of tigers burning from Valentine's shots does not fall apart into dust. It shrinks to a reasonable core. A heavy machine is vulnerable if it is forced to live outside of its own rules, and a 57mm cannon, being a modest tool, can launch a destructive cascade in the correct geometry of combat. The rest is a selection of vivid episodes, convenient formulas, and a human desire to explain complex things with a short phrase. The first thing that gets tested is the tactical truth. A short-range flank ambush really negates half of the advantages of a heavy tank. A low silhouette, patient sneaking, and 2 quick shots into the side or stern at the point of concentration of vulnerabilities give the result much more often than any desperate attempt head-on. In this frame, the Valentine does not look like a miracle weapon, but neither does it look like an extra. It is suitable for the role of a tool with which a disciplined crew turns the terrain into a force multiplier. It is this picture that formed the basis of the legend, because it is spectacular and morally satisfying. Cunning defeats the masses. The second thing that remains is the technological minimum. The Tiger's armor, like any tank of its time, is full of things that are bad, from hot chips and rapid airflow, fuel lines, oil films, powder charges, insulation, electrics. A hit with a normal firing effect almost guarantees at least a local outbreak, and sometimes a full-fledged fire. Here the legend does not lie. It only shortens the chain. Shot, fire, without pronouncing the intermediate steps.
For a witness of the battle commotion, this is a natural saving of attention. For a historian, it is a reminder that behind every outbreak there is physics and engineering. The third is the psychological framework. The perception of the tiger as a champion machine required counterplots. The story of the humble Valentine, who explained to the giant that armor is not the shield of the gods, turned out to be a successful cultural antidote. It has the main dramatic nerve of war. No one is invulnerable if the enemy thinks and sees the terrain. This moral residue is valuable in itself, even when we carefully separate burned and smoked, disabled and burned to the ground. The legend, read soberly, reminds us that myths that inspire don't necessarily lie. They just rhyme a special case with the desired norm. And what disappears? The word super heavy disappears. It was a rhetorical amplifier, not a classification. The hint of the miracle munition disappears, which made the impossible possible, always and everywhere. Special projectiles helped, but the angle, distance, and position decided. Versatility disappears. Valentine did not set fire to the tigers on schedule. He was often an extra, sometimes a victim, and only in a correctly assembled situation was he a hammer hitting the right nail. The illusion of instantaneity is also disappearing. Many fires developed with a pause, and some observations confused acrid rubber smoke and local outbreaks with total burnout. There are still disputed areas, and they are also easier to deal with than they seem. The transfer and availability of certain types of 57mm ammunition in a specific area, and at a specific time, are not always documented in such a way as to put a bold dot. This is not a reason to substitute fantasy for gaps. It is a reason to carefully set the limits of probability. Probably, the main work was done by ordinary armor-piercing projectiles at short distances and low-caliber projectiles occasionally. Probably, super results are rare and therefore well-remembered. Uncertainty is not the enemy of the article, but an honest slip of the tongue that builds confidence in the rest of the narrative. The semantic bottom line for a reader who loves technology, not stories, is simple. Valentine is a lesson about function and context. Its real value against the background of enemy monsters is not in the numbers of breaking through the table, but in the fact that the machine disciplined the crews to think about the terrain. Hide in the folds, catch the moment of turning, shoot, where the air ducts and mains live behind the armor, and do not stay in place for more than 2 shots. This style of combat provides a residual legend worthy of preservation. Not devaluing the tiger, but curbing its regalia where the battlefield ceases to be straight. There is also a useful remainder for military history and journalism. The legend worked as a headline of the war, a provocation to read. Our task is not to cancel the headline, but to provide it with content where emotions are friends with facts. In such an assembly, the reader gets both a scene and a drawing. He sees how the tugboat of tradition pulls a set of household parts behind it. Dirty mains, tired oil seals, a crack in the weld, a short sigh of the vent channel that helps the fire. He sees how a local victory is born from 3 or 4 correct decisions, and not from a magic bullet. For practitioners of battle reconstruction, the remainder is even more specific. If you want to understand where the tigers were burning, look not for the miraculous properties of the guns, but for the geometry of the exit to the side, the narrow places of the roads, the woods at the bends, courtyards with gates that fit exactly, the tower, and ditches that give a low profile with a short step to the shot. Look for the seconds when the heavy machine should change lanes, slow down, and straighten the hull. Look for the discipline that allows you to shoot first and leave before the enemy regains control. Where these conditions are not met, the legend goes out. Where it is performed, it comes to life. And this is normal. The most important remainder is the method. We started with a loud formula, went through dry armor schemes and a hot kitchen behind the armor, checked the plots with geometry and the breathing of machines. The outcome is not exposure, but a sober faceting. The legend no longer claims to be a universal truth, but it also does not turn into a trifle. It becomes a case study that explains how war rewards thought, coordination, and knowledge of one's own techniques. And this is much more valuable than any sensation. The sensation goes out, but the lesson remains. So it's worth leaving it, not as a debunked sign, but as a working parable with the right notes in the margins. There is a place in it for respect for a heavy machine, whose fame grew out of real strength, and respect for the crews of modest tanks who knew how to bypass this force. If we bring this particular remnant to the next debate about invulnerability, tactical optics, knowledge of post, battle processes, and the habit of checking details, a new myth will be born more cautiously, and the old legend, having lost its mystique, will retain the main thing, a reminder that armor is not a dogma, but an assumption tested on the ground.